Dr. Shivram Varamali currently works as the professor of the Department of Psychiatry in NIMHANS, National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences. He does research in psychiatry, particularly neurobiology of psychosis and the effects of yoga as therapy in psychiatric disorders. His current project is Yoga and Schizophrenia, a comprehensive assessment of neuroplasty, YSCAN. He was the elected Life Fellow of the Indian Psychiatric Society in 2013, as well as the elected member of the National Academy of Medical Sciences India in 2012. He has published about 90 research materials in journals on the effect of yoga therapy, mindfulness, on several psychotic disorders, especially for schizophrenia. He is currently guiding a student in the study of neurobiological effect of yoga as monotherapy in depression. He truly believes in the application and intervention of yoga therapy in mental health. I now request Dr. Shivram Varamali to speak on the topic of stress and yoga, a neuroscientific perspective.
You can move the slide from here, is it?
No, from there. As you say, it's from there.
Okay. Good afternoon. I hope all of you are not too sleepy after the lunch. It was a fairly sattvic lunch, so it should be all right. I'm happy to see a lot of interested people here to listen to a lecture on yoga and stress. And as I was just talking to Dr. Prabha from Kidwai, I am also happy to see Mayur, who used to be my colleague in NIMHANS, the neurosurgeon here. I was happy to meet Samantha Kamani, who is a very senior person in this field. I had not actually seen her, only heard of her. And of course, Raghuramji, we have interaction with them. I thank the Yoga Bharati for inviting me here. So today I will be focusing more on the way in which yoga we think works in patients with stress-induced disorders. I will not be talking much on the basics of yoga because most of you are probably better at that than me. So there is no point trying to talk about the basics of yoga to this audience. Can we have the next slide? Yeah. So why, of course, stress is almost ubiquitous now. There is nobody, unless you are sitting in Himalayas doing meditation, who doesn't have this word called stress. Of course, he has the stress of the weather and other things. But here, the context of stress is primarily what we either create for ourselves or the modern world creates for us. That's the stress that we are talking about today. And it has a huge contribution in most psychiatric problems that we see every day. In fact, this is an old figure, the 200 billion. Of course, it's not that it happens only in the US, it's simply that they have done research on it and come up with some financial figure for the impact of stress, which in India such a research has not been done. But that important thing is the last but one slide, that the 90% of visits to doctors seem to be stress related. You have stress, your immunity goes down, you get common cold, you get something else. You can see as in kids, as the exam comes, their health deteriorates. That's again because of stress. Next, please. So I will be going through, these are basically the topics which I will be speaking about. I will be focusing more on what are the effects of yoga in this particular stress-induced disorders and how we think that yoga does actually those affects them. Next one. What is stress? Basically, the best definition was given by Hans Selye, who is one of the most famous people in this field, way back in 1956, when he said it is basically a difference between capacity and demand. Whenever something is there which exceeds our capacity or our deemed capacity, what we think we are capable of. We may be actually capable of much more, but we think that we are only capable of so much, and when something exceeds that, we get what is called as stress. So, like I said, it is actual or perceived. That perception is very, very important here, as I would go on to describe. And therefore, we have, it is essentially an adjustment problem. So stress is an issue of adjusting to the demand put upon an individual, an animal, or anybody. Next one. So we all know this word homeostasis, which basically means ability to maintain something at a particular level. Equilibrium, you can use the word equilibrium or homeostasis, is that so many things are happening, there is so much stimulation, there is so many things happening, how we maintain ourselves within the cell as well as the total organism, that is called as homeostasis. So for that, anything that challenges is called a stress. And please don't think that all stress is bad. If there was no exam stress, nobody would ever read. No, stress is also necessary. So it is like a Yerkes-Dodson curve that is like a inverted U. Till a certain level, most of us are stimulated by stress. So I see so many people sitting here, I am stimulated to speak well. If there is only 2 people sitting here, I would probably lose interest. So that is necessary. That stress is necessary. That so many people are listening to me is a necessary stress. But if there is a a big noise coming from another side, none of you can hear me. Now that becomes distress. So there is a level beyond which it does not increase efficiency, rather it reduces efficiency. Or if I am expected to speak in a fish market, it's very difficult. I would get stressed because I cannot communicate, none of you can hear me. So there are stress which is good, that is called as eustress. Anything that is excess becomes distress. So there needs to be some level of stress so that we are motivated to do something, but if it becomes too much, then the efficiency starts coming down. Next one. So when I say stress from now on, I mean the one which is distress, not the eustress. So what happens? You have a negative emotional experience which becomes like a cycle. So for example, if your job is very stressful, when you are going from home only, you are already thinking about how will I do it today. And by the time you go there, you know that you will not do very well. On the other hand, if you find your job very stimulating, you would go, okay, I will do so many things today, I want to do this, I want to do that, you are likely to do well. So it's both an expectation effect as well as a reality-based effect. So that is why I was saying that perception of the person is the most critical thing. Because you can see there are people who do the most difficult jobs with a smile on their face, and there are people who do the most easy jobs, sitting like this. Typically you see a government clerk, because there is no motivation. He or she, it is not that he or she is a bad person, it is just that there is no motivation for doing a good job. Which is why you see a lot of people who are very well motivated in the teaching sector. Because they get motivation, people listen to them, people get some knowledge, something happens, somebody thanks them. That itself is a motivation for the person to do better. So it's a good stress. I have more students, more people want to take my advice. It stimulates me to read further, help those people. Whereas if you are not important in the scheme of things, you are sitting just putting the stamp and going, where is the motivation to work? So all this affects stress. So when you have stress, the body changes its chemistry, its physiology, and ultimately in the brain. Actually speaking, most of these are actually meant to help the body cope with the stress. But over a period of time, they become more inimical to the body. Next, please. So what we typically call as a fight-flight response. When we are under physical stress, suppose somebody suddenly says, you have to run 200 meters from here to there as fast as you can. So the body gears up, the sympathetic system goes into overdrive, noradrenaline is produced, more glucose is sent into the blood, so you are ready to run. Or if you are expected to do a boxing match, or you are something physical, or you are in a fight. So this is the normal coping mechanism of the body, so that everything is ready for the physical response. That is called the fight or flight response. But What happens over a period of time if the stress is continuous? All of us, asked to run 100 meters, fine, we will run. If you are asked to maintain the same pace for 10 kilometers, most of us cannot do it because that is not what the body is prepared for. For that, you need a different kind of preparation that the marathon runners do. And what happens is something called as response stereotyping. Once the body gets used, in neurology, there is a very famous law called Hebb's law, which says neurons that fire together wire together, which means that there is something learned over a period of time. It becomes very easy to do that. Why do most of us drive? We can drive keeping the mobile like this. You see people do that. How is it possible? Because the circuits in our brain responsible for driving have become so accustomed that it's almost automatic. You see the drivers, they drive for 10 hours, 12 hours. It is automatic for them. Driving is no longer considered as a difficult behavior. It just becomes automatic. So the circuit for driving has become automatic. Similarly, the circuit for stress also can become automatic. It's a problem. So even if there is no real stress, your brain is still going on the same loop. It's like listening to some song which you can't get out of your head. It happens to many of us. We can't simply forget it, we can't shut it out, that song keeps going on. Everything in the brain, we used to look at when we were MBBS students and even when we were doing our MD, we used to be taught areas in the brain. This area is responsible for that, this area is responsible for this, but now we know that it is no longer areas, it is circuits. So different areas of the brain are networked, and that network is the issue. So if this area of the brain is damaged, sometimes the other areas can join and do the same work. Otherwise, nobody would ever get better, isn't it? So it is circuitry. Now that circuit, once it becomes automatic, it is very difficult to switch it off. That is why people get epilepsy. Somebody gets a fits. Why do people take medicine for 3 years, 5 years? Because the circuit, in order to suppress that circuit, it takes that amount of time. So that's the important concept. Next, please. So a physiological, like I said, initially the body gets ready. It's a good response. It gives us more energy. We can handle that situation. If that situation continues, as you can see at the end of the slide, it goes into exhaustion. Then our reserves then we go into either depression or any of the psychiatric disorders. Next, please. So there is a person called Lazarus who was given a cognitive theory of stress. Just press the next button. Yeah. So Hans Selye assumed from the physiological angle that there is a stress, there is a response. A very simplified kind of equation. But that's not the real case. The other element of this, it is what is called as appraisal. Next. So a mental process, next, what is called as appraisal. In IT industry, it means an entirely different thing. But this is a cognitive appraisal. What it means is that how we appraise the situation. Suppose as a speaker, I am standing here, I see so many of you. If I am a person who is not comfortable in this situation, this is a stress for me. I appraise that, somebody is laughing, they must be laughing at me. I must be doing a bad job. Then this whole thing becomes stressful for me. Then what will happen? Next slide, please. As you can see, my mouth will become dry, butterflies start running around in my stomach, I will forget what I am going to say. So that is the response of the body. But it all depends on my appraisal, that is this a situation where I am comfortable or not. Now, most of us are teachers, so we are fairly comfortable in this situation because we do this very often. But for a person who is anxious or supposed to speak in front of a crowd for the first time, that's a serious stress. And many people have a panic attack in that situation. So it all depends on how you appraise it. The Dalai Lama was in Nimans in 2015 end, and he was one of the most wonderful people that I have ever interacted with. Of course, he's the only Nobel laureate that I have met. But the wonderful thing about him is that he's so simple. So when he came to Nimans, he gave us 2 hours of time. In that 2 hours, he spoke only half an hour, and the rest 1.5 he took questions from anybody in the audience. So there was an audience of, I think, 750 or 800 people. And one of our staff asked him, sir, you are the Dalai Lama, you are a Nobel laureate, you are such a big person, and how do you remain so simple? And he said, see, if I think I am a great person, I am the Dalai Lama, I am only one. If I think I am like all of you, I have 7 million brothers and sisters. You tell me which is better. So his ability to view that in that way is what makes him so childlike, so spontaneous. You know, he makes jokes about himself, he made fun of himself, he made fun of other people. He was so wonderful that anybody who comes into touch with him feels happy. Now that is, he handles it, you know, he sees 200 people a day. People come to, I and Dr. Gangadhar, who is the director of NIMHANS, went to meet him, and any day he meets around 150 to 200 people. And when we met him, we spent half an hour or 40 minutes with him. He was able to come, he was already 83 or 84 at the time. He was able to talk to us exactly on what he wanted to talk to us for 40 minutes. It's a wonderful capacity, probably because he meditates, you know, and follows many of the precepts of Buddhism. So it's a wonderful ability. Next. So why do people get stressed? Next. It could be everyday hassles, it could be a tough boss at work, it could be health, it could be children, it could be any of this, or like we have seen in what happened in Pulwama, or you know, natural disasters. It could be a terrible external thing that affects you. You know, just think of the women and children who have lost their husbands or fathers in Pulwama. You know, it's a terrible stress. So it could be external or it could be internal. Go ahead, next one. But it could never be said which is first. You know, is it a personality which leads to stress, or the stress leads to the personality? Is a very difficult thing to crack. So there is evidence to show, for example, that children who grow up in difficult situations are likely to get depressed later on. Now, that's a vulnerability that happens because of their difficult childhood. But then all people who grow up in difficult circumstances don't have that. So what is the other side of the story? What is the opposite of vulnerability? There is something called as resilience. That is an ability to withstand stress and remain strong. So that is what we have to focus on more than, because there are some things we simply cannot change. Can you change the past of a person? Can you change how their childhood was, or how their parents were? No, nothing of those can be changed. So you have to look at the resilience part of it. Next one. Yeah, sorry, this one. So essentially when you look at the body's response to stress, there are two major things. One is called the SAM, or the sympathetic adrenomedullary system, which is the one responsible for the flight or flight. It is primarily mediated by the autonomic nervous system. As you can see, the last lines, 2 lines, it increases the blood pressure, increases the heart rate, there is constriction of peripheral blood vessels, increased sweating. This is all preparation for a physical effort. Next one. So it is coordinated through the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system, primarily the sympathetic, which does all these changes. So the nervous system, what is called the peripheral nervous system, is primarily into 2 parts. The sympathetic is the one which makes you faster, active, pushes you. The parasympathetic is the exact opposite, it calms you down. Go ahead. The other major mechanism is through the hormonal system, hypothalamic pituitary axis. So this is the other thing that responds to stress and causes what is called the general adaptation syndrome through the corticotropin releasing factor, and then it goes downstream, and then finally what is the product? Hormone called as cortisol, which is commonly called as the stress hormone. So anytime there is stress, there is increase in cortisol in the blood. Cortisol is what is given to you when you have a skin allergy, you have, they give you steroids. This is exactly the same thing, which is the internal form of it. Next one. So this is a different mechanism. It is coordinated by the hypothalamus. Next, please. Which is, causing more problems in the long term. It seems that the cortical or the steroid system is responsible for more problems in the long term, because the cortisol is something that is secreted in the body and can affect almost every organ in the body. So long-term consequences seem more because of the HPA activation. As you can see, it can cause a lot of things: premature cognitive aging, obesity, and very importantly, an area in the brain called as the hippocampus. Hippocampus is the primary area in the brain for memory. Now that is very, very sensitive to the levels of circulating cortisol. So the more cortisol you have, the faster you will age. So that is why when you see people under stress, they age faster. So cortisol is the main thing which is responsible for that. Next. And like I said, most of this has a developmental origin. How you grow up, you have a happy childhood, you have a very supportive family, you are less likely to have stress-induced disorders because your mechanisms to handle stress have developed well. You grow up in great poverty, very difficult circumstances, these mechanisms don't develop well. And you are therefore vulnerable as an adult. Go ahead. Is it heritable? To some extent it may be. If the parents are themselves under severe stress, they themselves are having difficulty both in terms of taking care as well as in the genetic effects, it can affect their children also. Which is why in our culture there is so much importance given to a pregnant woman's care. It's not just that she needs to put on weight or she needs to eat well. It's also the emotional situation in the house during pregnancy is very important for the normal development, because as you know, most of the baby's organs are already formed by 5 months in the womb. So medicines, for example, the first 4 or 5 months are the critical thing where medicines can cause a problem. After that, nothing really happens. And once the baby is born, the brain development is almost complete by 6 to 7 years. Nothing really happens after that in terms of growth. A lot of things happens in terms of what is called as pruning. Like your gardener does, unneeded things he cuts off and makes it a very nice plant. Just like that, the neurons in the brain are pruned. What is not necessary is sort of cut out. That happens almost till the age of 25, 30. There is sort of what you say a modification of the brain, but growth does not happen. So the first 6 or 7 years of the child is critically important for the ability to have a well-developed nervous system. Next one, please. And what happens when you are under stress? Your immunology, the immune system gets affected. Your resistance to even common colds, viral fevers becomes low. And as you know, there are viruses everywhere. Even the air we breathe, there are so many viruses. Whether you get a viral infection or not entirely depends on your immune system. And therefore, you are very much responsible for how ill you are. If you don't take care of your immune system, you are going to get some of the other illnesses. So the same happens in depression, and there has been some Chinese meditation or even yoga studies which show that the resistance to illnesses went up after doing yoga. Next one. Very interestingly, there is something called as a telomere. This is a part of our gene which the length of which indicates how healthy or how young you are. And the telomerase is the enzyme which handles this telomere. Even single session of yoga has been shown to increase the levels of telomerase. So there is a study from Europe which shows that just 1 hour of yoga changed the way that the telomerases work. And therefore you can see that people who do yoga over a long period of time live longer, but more importantly live healthier. There's no point living longer if you're not healthy. So the oxidative DNA damage is very much marked when you have chronic stress, and yoga has been shown to actually reduce this. Next, please. So this old saying that Chitta dahati nirjeevam, chinta dahati jivanam is very much true if you look at modern molecular biology. Next one. Like I said, hippocampus is an area which is very sensitive. One of our PhD students, one Dr. Hari Prasad, did a study in old age homes in Bangalore. What he did, he went there, he taught them yoga for 6 months, a group of people. Another group of people living in the same place, they were doing their normal thing, no yoga. At the end of 6 months, what he was able to show is that their memory got better, sleep got better, quality of life got better, but very remarkably, the hippocampus size actually increased. Generally, as you know, as we age, the brain shrinks. The hippocampus actually becomes smaller. So even a small increase is a very remarkable thing. So meditation, for example, there is a very famous paper by Sarah Lazar from the United States, which shows that long-term meditators had thicker cortical areas than people who do not meditate. So it's not just functional, it is actually structural. Next one. So this system is something that is very important, what is called as the limbic system. This is one of the most primitive parts of the brain. It exists even in reptiles. It is the part of the brain that controls the most strong emotions. Anger, hate, lust, all are coordinated by the limbic system, the amygdala. Next one. So this is the limbic system, which has been put in green there. And as you can see, the amygdala, hippocampus are all very much closely linked to each other. Next one. So now this is about what stress does to the body. So what can we do about it? The answer is very simple, although doing it is not very simple, telling it is very simple. So you have a problem, a psychological way of doing it is confronting it. Okay, what is this problem? What can I do about it? What I cannot do about it? For many of my patients, I say that you take a book, two sides of the notebook. On one side you write down all the problems that you have, the thoughts that you have. The right side you write down what can actually be done about it. If there is nothing that can be done about it, close the book. Because there is nothing. There is no point wasting your mental energy on something that nothing can be done. If there is something to do, please do it. There is no point thinking about it. So confrontation is something that is very easy to say but very difficult to do. Most of us end up compromising. Okay, this is how life is. Okay, I will make some adjustment. I will carry on. I will not bother about it. Like you go on the road, people are shouting at each other. There is, noise. There is dirt. But what can you do? You can't change the BBMP no matter what you do. So you say, okay, I'll take care of my house, and you compromise. Or you withdraw. I'll go to Himalaya. I'll go to Mysore. I'll stay there. That's withdrawal. But none of these are practical solutions in today's world, because you are going to face it. You have to bring up your children, you have to look after your family, you have to study, so many things we have to do. Go ahead. The problem is when you can't do any of these other things, we have what we call as defense mechanisms, psychological defense mechanisms, which many of us, this is basically cheating your own mind. You take any of this, denial. No, actually there is no problem in the world at all. Or you forget about it, you repress it, you suppress it. You say, this is not my problem, this is Modi's problem. This is Rahul Gandhi's problem, not my problem. Or you intellectualize it, like many people sitting in high positions do. This is how life is. Life is meant to be difficult. It's more difficult for you than me, I can't do anything about it. Or you displace it. This is what most of us commonly do. We get upset in the office, we go and shout at our wives or husbands. You're displacing problem. You can't even keep the house clean. The problem is not actually with the house, the problem is with the office. But you can't tell that in the office, so you can tell that in the house. So we displace it, isn't it? And the most successful way in the world of doing it is what is called sublimation. Sublimation is basically driving that negative energy into a positive way, which is what but it's very difficult to do it. You would see, for example, some people who are physically handicapped put all their energy into, say, art or music and are able to achieve extraordinary things. That is because they are sublimating it, they are putting that energy into this field. It's a mature way of handling it, but it cannot be done by everybody. There are many yogis also who do that and put that energy into spiritual achievement. Right? Next, please. So if you ask anybody, they'll say, okay, reduce stress. Okay, adopt a healthy lifestyle. Now, how to reduce stress? There are some ways, of course, although like I said, it's difficult to do. Next one. First and foremost, you have to calm down, because when we are angry or when we are upset, decisions are likely to be poor. You want to do something, do it, but do it when you are in a calm state. You are likely to take the right decision. You want to beat up somebody. If you still think after 2 hours you should beat up that person, go and beat it. But you will not likely to do it, because you will realize it will not solve the problem. Isn't it? It's likely to create more problems. Reach out, somebody who can advise you, somebody can help you, support you. It's very important. If nobody can understand what's going on within you, how will they help you? Isn't it? It's especially so in the case of children. If children feel that you are not likely to take them seriously, they will not tell you anything. No point asking this person, isn't it? And please remember, children learn by seeing, not by being told. They will not listen to what you say. They will see what you do, they will do the same thing. If you are open with them, you tell them most things, they will tell you most things. You don't like to listen to them, you say, I know all that, don't talk to me. They will not tell you anything. So reaching out is a skill that you have to teach children, you have to teach yourself also. There is no problem expressing one's weakness to other people as long as you trust that person. Isn't it? All of us have weaknesses. So there's no great thing in, some people assume that if I am feeling sad, I am depressed, I must be weak. This is my weakness. It's not weakness, isn't it? Everybody feels down at some point of time. So some people take to religion, some people take to altruism, helping other people. I was just talking to Raghuramji during lunch that I went to Japan for a period of time, and that altruism is so much embedded in their culture that after they retire, they feel they are useless. I am of no use to Japan, I am of no use to anybody, why should I live? Because the whole idea of living is to help, work, bring up a family, do something, help the government, help Japan, help the world. If I can't do anything, then I should not be there. So altruism taken to the extreme also is a problem, isn't it? Because if you are incapable of helping anybody, then I should not live. So the rates of suicide are extremely high in Japan in the elderly. It's simply because they feel they are of not much. Many of the people don't have kids now, so there are no grandchildren. So what do? And being a son in Japan is a paid job. If there is an elderly couple who don't have a son, you can go stay with them, be their son for a monthly salary. So there are people who do it. That's a job. So you take care of them. You do whatever a normal son would do, but it's a job. So that is the situation they are in, because they have spent so many years only working, forgetting about their family, that when work is ended, there's nothing left. So people take to that, but it's not entirely a successful strategy. The last one is very important. You have to learn to cope. Right? Next. The second part of it, adopting a healthy lifestyle. I'm sure all of you would know about this. Diet, it's very important. Till now in medical science, the only thing that has been shown to increase a person's lifespan is cutting down calories. In so many years of medical research, that is the single thing which has been shown. You eat less, you live longer. So diet is very important, and Ayurveda, for example, lays a lot of stress on the diet. Because if you don't follow a proper diet, it's very unlikely that you can be healthy. Exercise, again, very important. For many of people who don't really believe in yoga, I say, okay, no problem. You don't do yoga, you do exercise. You do exercise very mindfully, it's yoga. Isn't it? So we have written a review paper on comparing yoga and physical exercise, published in the International Review of Psychiatry. But in that, essentially what we say is that it is the mindfulness that matters. If you do exercise in a very measured manner, thinking of what you are doing, looking at your body, that is yoga, isn't it? So you tell yourself you are doing exercise, no problem. Smoking, alcohol are short-term solutions which bring long-term problems, isn't it? But many people simply don't realize. There are so many doctors who smoke, every day morning they will advise the patient not to smoke and then they go home and smoke. So that is because nicotine is simply the most addictive substance in the world. Although we see much more serious problems, in NIMHANS, for example, we have opioids, methamphetamine, speed, cannabis, alcohol. The most difficult to quit is nicotine. The mere smell of a cigarette can send people mad for having a cigarette. Whereas many people I have seen giving up alcohol, giving up opioids. Smoking is very difficult. So you have to understand that it is so addictive. No point shouting at the person for not quitting. You have to support the person because it is not easy. I have seen so many people trying, they are able to quit everything else, not nicotine. So best is not to start, isn't it? So it's very difficult. And as far as nicotine is concerned, again, there are calculations which show that each BD or cigarette is 5 minutes of your life, takes away 5 minutes of your life. It's very clear. So there's no doubt at all. Because alcohol, there are many people who can say drink only once a month. In the Western culture, it's very common. So I and you meet, we drink a coffee, there they drink beer. So it's a social lubricant. Come, let's have a beer together. They don't exceed that. Whereas here, a person drinks till he passes out. So that is the problem, isn't it? It's same with pizza, same with alcohol. We take the West, but we don't follow. I don't know whether any of you are going to Italy. If you go to Italy, it's very interesting. You go and ask for a pizza, they'll give you one triangle. And they'll give you full of salads and all that. That is pizza. So I was standing there and asking, where's the rest of the pizza? I said, this is the pizza. That's how people eat. Whereas here, one fellow eats a whole pizza. That's a serious problem. So we have taken their contribution but not doing it the way. It is like what West has done with yoga. Oh, India has yoga, we'll also do. But how are you doing it? You are doing it like cardio. No, that's not the way to do yoga. But unfortunately, that's how it is. So they don't seem to realize that yoga's focus is the mind, not the body. So we also have the same problem, especially the US. It supersizes everything. No, this much pizza they'll give. No, for the same price we'll give you double the size. Oh, very good. You eat double. So high risk behaviors. Right now, almost everything we do is high risk behavior. For example, there is so much evidence now that sugar is the single largest reason that most of us have illnesses. There are many people who don't take sugar at all now. And many people have told me just by doing that, they're able to lose 2-3 kilos in 2-3 months. Nothing else. No exercise, nothing. Stop sugar. Anything that you add sugar to, stop it. That's good enough. Next. Now, why should yoga have a role in stress? This is if you see the one at the bottom, Professor Govindaswamy, who started NIMHANS in 1954, he was also a noted Sanskrit scholar. So he has picked this up and put it inside the logo of NIMHANS. At that time, there was nothing called yoga in NIMHANS at all, but he had the foresight to see that it would be a very important thing for psychiatric problems. So this comes from, next, I'm sure all of you know this. This comes from the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna, basically Arjuna is having an existential crisis, and Krishna advises him, Yogastha kuru karmani sangham tyaktva dhananjaya siddhi asiddhyo samo bhutva samatvam yoga uchyate. So ability to maintain equilibrium in any given situation is yoga. That is his definition of yoga. So Professor Govindaswamy has put it in the logo. Next please. What is the evidence for yoga in psychiatric disorders? I'm not going to talk too much of individual disorders, but if you take all the studies which are considered as methodologically sound and put them together, an effect size of minus 3.25 is a remarkable effect size, which means it's almost 3 times as powerful as doing nothing. So it has 3 times better chance of improving psychiatric illnesses compared to no treatment. Go ahead. This is one of the early studies we did in collaboration with the Dr. Gangadhar and Dr. Janki Ramaya, who are my teachers at NIMANS, did this study in collaboration with Sri Sri Ravi Shankar's Art of Living. What they did is actually took major patients with major depression admitted at NIMANS, put them into 3 groups, randomized. One group got only Sudarshan Kriya Yoga. One group took medicines, imipramine 150 milligrams. The third group, what we call as ECT or shock therapy. That is the strongest treatment that we have for depression till now. It's the most effective one. We give it generally only to the most severe ill people. What happened at the end of 3 months? Yoga and medication were not different. ECT, of course, was much superior, as we would expect, being the most potent treatment. This was the first study anywhere in the world which showed that yoga alone could be a treatment for depression without the need for medication. And mind you, these are all people who had fairly severe depression admitted in NIMANS. Right? So this was published in 2000. Next, please. We have also repeated this study in a little different manner recently. Naveen GH, who was a PhD scholar with us, did another study where we took people only medications, medicine along with yoga, only yoga. And as you can see, if not better, yoga was at least equal to medication. So the numbers are small, of course, for a RCT. It's not as big as the drug numbers. This is primarily because we are sitting in NIMANS. People don't come to NIMANS expecting yoga. They might come to Yoga Bharati or Svyasa expecting yoga, but not to NIMANS. They come to NIMANS expecting medicine. So when we say yoga, they look at me, why are they telling me yoga? So we don't get the kind of people who are likely to ask for yoga. We offer it to them. Many people agree, some people don't agree. Next, please. And how does it do? It's very important. What does yoga do to the body? In a couple of studies, one done by Vedamurtachar, who is the Art of Living instructor employed in NIMANS in the addiction ward, as well as a more recent study, we have shown that yoga reduces cortisol levels. This is now reasonably well accepted evidence. And please remember what I said about cortisol, that is the single largest driver of stress in the body, right? And there are many other studies, again a Chinese study which showed that meditation increased a factor which helped immunity. People with cancer after radiotherapy, I think Mayur is in HCG. So Raghavendra, I think who used to be the Syasa before, and Amrit, both are in HCG. So there is so much need in these patients because radiotherapy is a very difficult thing to handle. It's a very stressful experience that people go through, and it can improve both psychological state and DNA damage. And stress measures, and this is a study done by Dr. Satyaprabha and Dr. Satish Chandra at NIMANS, that patients with epilepsy who did yoga, the frequency of seizures as well as lot of neurophysiological variables got better after yoga. The treatment-resistant epilepsy patients. Next, please. Of course, there are many studies which show direct effects of yoga. The simplest way to say is that next to NIMANS on the Banerghatta road, there are full of software companies. Almost all of them have a yoga therapist coming every day. And these are highly commercial corporations who would not do anything unless there is a direct benefit. Isn't it? Why are they paying people to come and teach yoga? It's because they see that stress is reduced and people, from their perspective, work harder. That's the idea they have. But, And Khalsa, Satbir Khalsa is a person, I'm sure many of you with Associated Svyasa would have seen Satbir. He is a US-based psychologist who works in the Faculty of Medicine in Harvard. He has done a lot of work on music students when they have anxiety before exams, that yoga helps them tremendously. Next, please. So I come to the last part of my presentation because in science it's very important. You say something works, nobody takes it very seriously. How does it work? You have to show that. That is what we are trying to do at NIMANS. And this, in that study that I told you, in alcohol patients, our cortisol came down. There is a very nice correlation between their depression getting better and the cortisol going down. Next slide. This is even better shown in the next slide. This is a recent study by Dr. Jagdish and Naveen. this is a 3-arm study where people were either taking medicine plus yoga, only medicine or only yoga. So here what happened in both the groups who did yoga, cortisol came down. All the 3 groups improved in depression. So even the medicines worked. But if your cortisol doesn't go down, what happens when you stop the medicine? It's coming back. Whereas in the people who did yoga, the cortisol came down, it's likely the depression won't come back. That's the most important thing, isn't it? Once you start taking medicine, medicine works. It works beautifully. When do you stop? It's a question that most of us cannot answer. We'll say, what else have you done? Have you changed your lifestyle? Have you done something else? Have you changed your job? You can't change your husband or wife, but have you changed other things? Have you started yoga? Have you done diet? If not, we are very reluctant to stop medicine. Because I'm sure that 3 to 6 months down the line, you're going to get it back. So this is very critical. Next slide. And like I said, there's a very nice correlation between cortisol going down and the depression getting better. It simply means in neurology or psychiatry, we use a term called neuroplasticity. It basically means the ability of the brain to repair itself. All of us have that. When we were MBBS students, we were taught the brain is a very static organ. Something is damaged, at the end of it. That's not true. Brain has a tremendous ability to reorganize itself. This is called as plasticity because it's like plastic. It means flexible, right? Children have the highest level of neuroplasticity. Their brains are very plastic. As we age, the plasticity comes down. Therefore, we get dementia, we get all those things because the brain is no longer able to, something is not working, I can transfer it here, that there's nothing there to transfer. So that is a problem with age. Whereas young children who have stroke, for example, recover wonderfully. It doesn't happen so much in adults. In age, it is very difficult. So this cortisol, what seems to do is reduce neuroplasticity. When you reduce cortisol, you do yoga, your brain is able to, the nervous system is able to do or repair itself. So yoga is just helping the body repair itself. Yoga need not repair the body itself, the body will do it. Next please. And this is shown by a neurotransmitter called as the brain-derived neurotropic factor. So BDNF. This is something which is we have done at NIMHANS. So basically the BDNF is the marker for this so-called neuroplasticity. So it is something that the brain releases. The level is higher, your brain is healthier. Level is very low, brain is not healthy. And it is a very well proven thing now in psychiatric research that patients who are depressed or patients who are under stress, the BDNF levels goes down. What we have shown is that after they do yoga, the BDNF levels goes up. And again there is a very nice correlation. Cortisol goes down, BDNF goes up. So your body's natural ability to heal itself is going up. So if you are able to show this, it means that it may be true that even ECT does this. ECT in fact is known as the single most potent inducer of neuroplasticity. Because if you ask me as a psychiatrist how ECT works, after so many years of research, even now I am not very confident to say that it works in a particular way. Now we are coming to an understanding that actually it does the same thing. It induces neuroplasticity, it allows the brain to repair it. It's like resetting your computer. No, nothing works, you switch it off, switch it on. Somehow it resets itself and becomes normal. People used to do that with the Bajaj scooter also. Kick it a few times. Now that era is gone. But so that is what we are trying to do. So this slide basically shows that people who are depressed have less levels of BDNF than normal people, and after they do yoga, it comes back towards normal. Go ahead. Next slide, please. Okay. Again, this correlation is what I was talking about. Next. This is what I was talking about. This is a paper from the Frontiers which shows that people who were meditating for a long period of time, their brains did not shrink at the rate that normal people's brains shrink. So the shrinkage was much less in people who are doing yoga or meditation for a long period of time. The dotted line or the broken line is normal people who are not doing yoga. The thick line is the one who are doing yoga. Next, please. Another interesting mechanism, there is something called as the GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid. This is a neurotransmitter which job is to inhibit impulses in the brain, keep the brain under control. Right? Next, please. And Streeter, in a study, Chris Streeter showed through a study that even one session of yoga increases GABA levels. But that is a very difficult study to do. It involves something called as MRS, magnetic resonance spectrography. Very difficult technique. We try to do it through another technique. There is something called a cortical silent period. When there is a stimulus in the EMG, after the stimulus, there is a silent line. The flat line is called as the CSP. This is a marker of how well the brain is able to, how does a person with seizure recover? You see people on the road sometimes have a fit. You don't do anything, you just wait for 2 minutes, the fit goes away. People give steel and all that thing nonsense, but it goes away by itself actually. How does the brain? The brain realizes, oh, there is something going on. It puts all its mechanisms to stop the seizure. Now, this is a marker of that ability to inhibit an impulse. Next. And this shows that people who do yoga had a significantly longer cortical silent period, which means they were able to inhibit their brains better. Next. So we did a prospective examination before and after yoga, and again we were able to show that people who did yoga increased their ability to control their brain impulses. Next. This is just an illustration. I think it's not very evident here, but the 51.95 was the CSP. Before yoga, it became 106, which is more than double after 20 sessions of yoga. Next, please. So then we looked at patients with depression. It is well known that in patients with depression, this ability is reduced. Ability to inhibit. Therefore, you get a lot of negative things. You don't want to think about it, it still comes. You can't stop it. So that is the ability to inhibit. Next. It is very clear. The right side is patients with depression. The left side are normal, healthy controls. As you can see, there is a very wide difference. The patients with depression had a low CSP. Next. And we compared yoga with just walking to keep the time same. So they did yoga for 45 minutes, they walked for 45 minutes. And as you can see, the lower bar is yoga, the triangle went up, walking didn't change it very much. Next slide. So this is a very nice slide. Is this a pointer?
No, sir.
No, okay. So these are patients with depression before walking, after walking. As you can see, almost all are same. These are the same, these are patients with depression before yoga. Oh, thank you. What happened after yoga? As you can see, the CSP went up. These are normal healthy people, so it has not yet gone. Yeah. So this has not gone up to that level. This is normal level. So from here it has gone to here. Of course, this is only 5 sessions of yoga. Maybe if they do 30 or 40 sessions of yoga, it may go here. That is our hypothesis as to how yoga works in these people. Next, please. I will end my presentation with a short story about Om. So Om is something that almost all yoga practices incorporate. Why is it so? Next. Because this Om chanting is a very powerful driver of the parasympathetic system. Right? Next, go ahead. So when I'm sure all of you, when you chant Om, you get that sort of vibratory sensation around the ears, which is not there if I say nothing. I say you get that sensation. Why is that? Because this sound stimulates the vagus nerve, and there is a vagus afferent in the ear which gives you that vibratory sensation. And the vagus, as most of you will know, is the most important parasympathetic nerve. It is the longest cranial nerve and the most important. So, in fact, there is a treatment called as VNS. You all have heard of a cardiac pacemaker. For some resistant patients with depression, they implant an electrode in the vagus nerve. So, it's an operative procedure. You open it up and put it there, and it keeps being stimulated. And it helps people whose depression has not improved with anything else. So, what we think actually, go ahead. So, what we think is that, or we thought rather, is that Om should do something similar. It is an autogenous way of stimulating your vagal nerve. So we hypothesized that Om chanting would evoke similar correlates, deactivation of the limbic brain regions. Go ahead. So what we did, there is something called as BOLD, blood oxygen level dependent imaging. Basically it shows the blood flow in the brain by a chemical mechanism. Go ahead. So what normal people, assuming all of us are normal, they were asked to do Om in a particular way. I am sure as your yoga teachers would have taught you. And we controlled using that was the control. So some point of time they were saying Om, some point of time they were taking rest, and some point of time they were saying, just to give a control condition. Next. And what happened actually, during Om chanting, there was simply no activation, rather there was deactivation. So there was minus. So where was the minus? In the regions which I talked to you before. The limbic area which controls most of our negative emotions. Right? Next please. So this is the brain when was being chanted, and this is the various parts of the brain when Om was being chanted. And the yellow parts here show deactivation, which basically means less blood is going to that area. And all of us know that if I keep doing this, more blood comes here. So if I do imaging here, it will show more activation here. Whereas here the reverse happened, that it produced deactivation. Next please. So what does it mean? This is the limbic circuit, Pepes circuit, which controls a lot of our unwanted or excess emotions. So if blood flow is less to that area, it means the brain area has calmed down. Prashamanaha is what you would call in yogic terms. So it seems that simple Om chanting is able to produce this blood flow change in the brain. And this is only, 15 or 20 seconds of Om. If you chant it every day, imagine what will happen. Next, please go ahead. So, to summarize some of the work that we have done in NIMHANS, so we have looked at in schizophrenia, there is definite improvement in symptoms correlating with the decreased plasma cortisol. There is improvement in social cognition, which is the ability to understand other people's emotions, which is very critical to our everyday life. It seems to be mediated by oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone, and mirror neuron activity. In depression, there is improvement in symptoms. As I told you, BDNF and cortisol goes down, BDNF goes up. The elderly, I talked about Hariprasad study. They got better with memory, sleep, quality of life. Brain's areas actually became slightly bigger. In this obsessive compulsive disorder and many other disorders, we are still at the level of looking at symptoms. We have not yet studied the mechanism. Hopefully, we will do it in the future. Next. And in our culture, because I did a study on schizophrenia and yoga, many of the women, we compared, in that study I had 3 arms. Yoga, physical exercise, which is the PT that we all did in school, and just taking medicine. Many women dropped out from the exercise group. When we asked them, said,